Welcome to Access Denied, the tragic story of 15 million children locked outside the schoolhouse door and how we can fix that. My name is Dirk, and I'll be your host. I'm really excited about today's show. We got Eric Gordon, the CEO of Cleveland Metropolitan School District, on, and you should be excited too. They're doing some really amazing work in closing the digital divide and providing internet for all. And they're doing it their own way, creating their own networks, extending wireless to public housing, and creatively plugging short-term holes while looking at the long-term solutions that are not necessarily dependent on the goodwill of our esteemed private broadband providers. Many localities, including Oakland, could learn from Cleveland and the leadership that's driving this progress. So thank you all for joining us today. We have over 100,000 views on the show, 37,000 supporters, every one of us pushing for internet for all. That is one, free broadband to every family that needs it. Two, a device for every child that's appropriate. And three, technical support for families that's culturally competent so that every family can fully access the digital schoolhouse. Back in the day, Cleveland was one of the most disconnected. Wait, I got something coming in. Actually, the new data is Cleveland is the most disconnected city in America. It used to be fourth. Now it's first. We don't have the latest chart up there, but I just got a text in saying that. It's the most disconnected city in America. But it's also one of the most forward thinking in fixing that. And they're thinking outside the cable box, building their own solutions in some cases, rather than just relying on the kindness of private providers. And if you remember the whole Blanche Dubois, I've always relied on the kindness of strangers line, that's kind of where we're at in terms of our internet support for our families right now. We've heard thousands of complaints against the providers. They all signed the Keep America Connected pledge, but that has no teeth. Well, about as many teeth as your great-great-grandpa with a bad case of scurvy who just got out of the ring with Iron Mike. We need better than that. We have played those complaints for you before. 13 hours on hold, folks who can't pay for groceries being cut off with their kids excluded from schools, families begging to be connected but denied because of some old bill or some ornery customer service rep. It might be different if we treated internet like other public utilities and regulated providers and forced them to serve the public interest rather than their own private profit interests and do that equitably. But we don't for some bizarre reason. The FCC believes that the internet is a luxury and not an essential. And so it chooses not to regulate these providers, the providers who hold the keys to the schoolhouse door. And it should not be on our individual parents who are often struggling just to put food on the table to now negotiate and pay for internet. We individually may not have created this shameful state, but we collectively are responsible for it. And our guest today has taken the leadership role in finding real solution and enduring fixes for this problem. So I'm glad to have a fixer in the room with us. This is Eric Gordon. Eric is probably the longest serving urban superintendent in the universe at almost a decade. He's a longtime educator, and I really appreciate just looking through his background and his educational chops on this and really approaches the work from an equity lens. He was also voted the most interesting person in the universe, I think, a couple of years ago. So we're going to really put that to the test today and see if he is. But I really want to thank our guest for joining us. I want to thank him for the work that he's doing and just driving policy in the right direction. So thank you, Eric. You can introduce yourself better than I can. I would love to hear just a little bit about your background and really your approach to being a superintendent. And then let's dig in on some of the digital divide problems and solutions.
Going to have a hard time living up to that introduction. My name is Eric Gordon. I'm the superintendent here in Cleveland, Ohio. Started my 10th year this year. I've been in the district and community for 14 years. I'm a kid from Toledo. I'm a first generation college goer and graduate. Worked most of my career in urban education, but actually took a portion of my career in affluent suburban communities. And so I've understood what other kids and other families have access to. And so, I've really made my mission over 9 years here in Cleveland, or 13, to really create the capital and social capital for my kids and families that everybody's kids and families should enjoy. For me, this digital access is both. It is the capital of having this equipment. It's also, like you said, the social capital of having the supports and getting the technical help that other families are able to easily get. So I'm really looking forward to this conversation today.
That's great. Could you bring up the digital divide slide, Josh, so we can just take a look and remember everyone that this is actually old data. Cleveland is the worst in terms of digital access right now. And again, I think you'd see these similar patterns across many, both urban and rural areas, where more affluent families have more access. Geographically, some families are kind of locked out of access based on where they live. And I bet if you put a redlining map up against that, it would align pretty well with what those access maps looks like. So could you tell us, Eric, a little bit about on in Cleveland? What is the divide like? How do families experience this? And a little bit about kind of your approach to changing this.
Yeah, so this is actually a graphic that we provided for you from our Empower Cleveland effort. Just yesterday, the updated census data from 2019 came out, and unfortunately, we've now earned the dubious distinction of moving from fourth worst connected to single worst connected in the city. What does that mean? It means 31% of our community has no access, none. Worse than that, it means 46% of our community has no hardwired access, no Ethernet, DSL. So they may have access through their cell phone and a kind of a digital access, but that's limited to that. Cleveland is a good ground zero because we have the single highest childhood poverty in the country. We are a state that is urban and rural. So we have more urban centers than most states and more rural. So when you look at this problem at a state level, you do see it is not an urban inequity. It is an equity across regions. But for our kids and families, it means that we have kids and families that for years have never touched these devices. And so prior to the pandemic, we teach advanced placement computer science here in Cleveland, and my teachers would send home low-tech homework. You knew students couldn't be coding at home. And we would open schools early so kids could come in and work in the labs and get that coding time. And that was advanced placement computer science in Cleveland, right? And so now we have this pandemic and we have a great opportunity to seize this moment and fix this problem once and for all.
And I appreciate looking at this as an opportunity. It is a painful opportunity in a lot of ways, but it really, if we had ever thought this wasn't a problem, there's no way we can close our eyes to these challenges right now.
Yeah, I actually have to call the question of if we thought this was a problem. We knew this was a problem.
Yeah.
This is a problem. The food disparities in my community are a problem. The health disparities, we knew this. And what COVID-19 has done is made it impossible for people to pretend they didn't know. And that's a question we really have to call. We knew kids didn't have access to these tools. And it's not just kids. I'm focused on my school problem, but that data that you just saw is my community's problem. And it's not new, and it's not something we didn't know.
Yeah, I love that, calling the question on this ultimately, and let's see what answer we come up with. So tell me, short term, I think the way we've seen folks this working out is everyone has some short term gaps to fill. And then we can either look at the long term solutions, or we can just try to keep doing short term gap filling. Could you tell us a little bit about the gap filling piece? And then I'd like to get to the longer term piece.
Yeah, so I would say, first off, we were complicit in the problem. And looking back and having been the leader for almost a decade, we contributed to this problem. Cleveland was not prepared to move to a one device per student strategy because we knew families didn't have internet. And so we didn't, build a muscle around that, right? So when the pandemic hit, we had twin problems. The first problem is that we didn't have devices to hand out because we never imagined we would be in a position where 37,000 children would need devices. And we had no way to connect them once they were out there. So, last fall we scoured and tried to get a device per home to keep everybody engaged. Since then, we've purchased over 28,000 devices. I think we're nearing 30,000 at this point, over 14,000 hotspots, and have been pushing those out over the last several weeks. Would love to talk about the challenges of doing that in a pandemic where everybody's buying, because we've learned a lot. But that's got us connected for the short term. We also are going to have to really put our attention to the long term. I guess the other thing I would say is even the short-term response will reveal a lot about what communities will tolerate. And so very early on, people were saying to me, well, why don't you wire your school buses and park them in parking lots, and then kids can have access? And I said, yeah, let's do that. When you're ready to watch this program by standing against a school bus so that you can access the internet, then my kids can do that. And they weren't, they're well-meaning people, but we've got to call questions about whose kids matter and how much they matter. And those assumptions implicit in those kinds of statements were really troubling. And so we've made a commitment that our first step was to get everybody's home connected. And then our second step is to make that home connection permanent.
Yeah. And, you know, I always think about my own child when I do this work and what I would want for my child. And I don't want my child sitting in a parking lot somewhere trying to do his homework as the sun goes down in Oakland. Like, I just don't. And our children deserve better than that ultimately. And we can give them better than that ultimately.
Yeah, we absolutely can. I mean, we have the resources and the technology in this country to do this. You know, we were talking before the program, you know, we don't yet have a vaccine for coronavirus. We will get one. So there's the science needed to figure that out.
Yep.
We know everything we need to know to solve this problem.
Yeah, and it's just a matter of will, ultimately. It's not even really a matter of resources. You know, the amount of money that gets, you know, $2 trillion went out in the first stimulus bill. 1 to 3 will go out in this next stimulus bill. For some very small portion of that, or one, you know, 750 billion is in the annual defense budget. About 1% of that would fix this nationwide.
Look at change to E-rate. Let's take the word classroom out of E-rate and make E-rate eligible for infrastructure in our communities. Even that would use existing resources without even taking resources from anywhere else, right? There are solutions to this, and we just have to get about making them happen.
Yeah, and it's going to take pressure. Because again, I think, like you said, the E-rate one is really just an administrative regulation change, or the way it's not even changing a regulation, it's changing the interpretation of a term within an administrative regulation, which could be done on the turn of a dime if the FCC wanted to do that.
Right, and if your home is your classroom, then let's wire that home.
Yeah.
You mentioned the FCC. You know, the FCC's approach too. I mean, I think we've got to convict everyone who's complicit. The FCC immediately announced the Keep America Connected program. What's the assumption behind that? We're connected.
Right.
So a city like Cleveland was already off of the grid when that first connectivity statement came out saying our priority is to keep America connected.
Yeah. No, it cut out 40% right there. Yep. And it just ignored them. Like, we don't need to keep America. We need to get America connected pledge and a right that every American can be connected. And one of the comments that came up, I think, is right on too, which I think went to your school bus thing is, you know, some of the plans we're seeing come out really don't provide what families need. They're like, you know, here's one computer and one hotspot for your 7-kid household. And now y'all figure out how you're going to juggle classes and get online.
Yeah, I mean, we're seeing that in Cleveland. So the stats that I talked about are the disconnected families, but there's a whole second layer of the underconnected families. I live in the city of Cleveland. I had to change my provider because the infrastructure in my neighborhood was so old that one provider, the technician who kept coming to my house to get me reconnected, said, "Sir, I don't know what to tell you. This is the best you're going to get." I actually had the luxury, because I can, to change to a different provider who used a different network. But there is a huge infrastructure challenge for those who are connected. I have families who thought they were set, who are now coming back and saying, "Oh, I need that hotspot after all." And we've ordered another 7,000 hotspots just to address that next challenge in the short term as well.
Yeah, yeah. And so I'd love to hear, you did mention just what are some of the issues that you're hearing in this kind of short-term rollout from families? You mentioned a couple of them, kind of that's the the cultural competence around technical support, the actual need for bandwidth?
Yeah,
What are
so
the issues you're hearing?
I mean, I would start by saying that a couple of lessons learned immediately, because we launched last week, is we probably shouldn't have turned on 37,000 people all at once because we were not prepared to support them. And so we added to the frustration, and shame on us. And frankly, if you go and follow any Cleveland media, you'll see my apology, because we got to apologize. We got it wrong, right? But we also really underestimated the level of support that kids and families need. And again, kind of shame on us. We knew that families didn't have internet and devices. And so when we handed a device and a hotspot out and said, in step one, connect your device to the internet, we started getting calls saying, how do you do that? Well,
Mm-hmm.
we should have known that. We should have known that question was coming, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so there's a level of support that kids and families need. Think about how most suburban communities that had already moved to one-to-one device strategies did it. They did it in live instruction at their school. The tech support was in the classroom. By the time the device went home, the student and the family knew what to do with it.
Yep.
We're in the position now of helping families learn it in their home while we're on the other side far away. So that was a big issue for us. Another really big issue is, we have a pretty large English language learner population.
Mm-hmm.
So we have partnered with refugee response here in Cleveland and got some grant funds to set up a mobile tech strategy so that families of other languages, our immigrant and refugee families, have somebody who can help in their language and help with that cultural layer, and hired expanded translation services so that we can help as well. Fortunately, that was one we were ahead of. We knew we needed to do that, right? But those are the kinds of things that complicate this.
Mm-hmm.
The hotspots, the hotspots come out and they have this throttling that you get so much data at such a speed at first, and then they slow down. And so we have to make sure that all of our devices have full data. We can't have kids in Zoom classrooms, 3 kids in a home, mom or dad or caregiver trying to work too, and then suddenly have the tool we gave them slow down. So that's a challenge to work through. So just a myriad of near-term, just getting the worst connected city connected. And then we've got to turn to, how do we make it permanent? How do we actually build out an infrastructure on this and not make it a short-term investment and actually a big, expensive one that just shuts off at the end of a pandemic?
Yeah. So let's talk. Tell me a little bit about, the thing that excited me about this show was the long-term vision you all had. I know everyone's stumbling through the short-term piece with differing levels of success, but you had just a better, from my perspective, a better vision of how this should look going forward. And I'd love to hear a little bit about what is the vision for broadband for Cleveland, and there's a couple of examples that I think we'll bring up in the slides around some of the populations you've really reached out to and supported. And so I'd love to just hear, how is Cleveland going to fix this long term?
Well, so we're still a work in progress, and I want to be really clear on that. But it's some lessons we learned that we figured out how we can help be part of the solution. So we, immediately did like many communities and reached out to the providers who had what appeared to be free or low cost opportunities for our families. And, on paper and technically, they do exist. What we found, though, is that between families who don't know how to navigate the system, families who had credit problems and therefore became ineligible, and any myriad of other reasons. I'm non-documented. I don't want, I'm afraid of anything that has kind of a governmental feel, that families weren't getting access, right? At the same time, we have a local effort, it's on the screen here, called Digital C, which is an effort to create our own nonprofit provider here in Cleveland. So we take the profit out of it, which makes it affordable. And then we take an opportunity to get that in the home at about $20 a month. And their problem, the model, can work, but they need an infusion of cash to get it going.
Mm-hmm.
And so here I am spending really millions of dollars on hotspots, $20 a month for the next full year to keep people connected, which is, it's working, but it's not permanent. It doesn't solve the problem. At the same time, that same $20 a month could infuse the capital that Digital C needs. And so we've created Empower CMSD, part of a larger Empower CLE initiative where we will be the customer. The district will be the customer for our parents. That takes the credit off the table. It takes the the immigration issues off the table. It takes the navigation issues. As long as you're a student here, and we're going to provide you a hotspot anyway, we're going to actually take the opportunity to get you off the hotspot and onto the nonprofit network. We're also actually going to our homes. We canvassed in our Hispanic neighborhood just a couple of weeks ago, where it's me knocking on the door, someone I know and trust, right?
Mm-hmm.
So somebody from my school saying, I've brought this person who's going to get you hardwired so that you have internet in your home. And as long as you stay with the district, we're going to pay for it. So if you are on our Digital C platform, you get a bill. You know that internet costs you $20 a month, but then you get a $20 credit for being a CMSD student and family for as long as you are. What it does over time, as we get more and more homes wired, is that families then ultimately can pick up that $20, which when we look at the other places they're spending money to get access to content that they can get through the internet, we can, through education, say, you can get Hulu and all of these other kinds of tools through the internet, drive your costs down, and that's why you can afford it. So it's a long game strategy. It's part of a bigger solution. Digital C itself is not going to solve the connectivity of the entire city, but it's another layer of connectivity, particularly in our worst connected neighborhoods.
I love that. And so how'd that partnership really develop? You talked to I think a lot of folks have want something like that, but very few folks are able to actualize it or kind of move it beyond the kind of theory stage to the practice stage. Was this in motion before COVID, or how did you guys get to this point of actually putting this into place?
So Digital C existed in Cleveland before COVID. Candidly, the district didn't have a deep relationship. We knew of each other, we liked each other, we supported each other, but we weren't working together. This really came out of a few things. Everybody wants to help, but nobody had a plan. And literally in March, April, and May, everybody called me. I am not an IT person. You mentioned my education background. You don't see IT in it at all. But the irony is no one would talk to my IT people unless they got an audience with me. And every conversation was, what do you need? Here's a plan. We should do this. And the only organization I found that was actively working a plan was Digital C. And again, I had just hit this barrier of I'm spending lots of public resources on hotspots that expire and not creating permanency. And here's this organization struggling to have the capital they need to create permanency. And so it was kind of like a kismet kind of relationship that, hey, if we use the resources you're going to spend anyway toward this larger goal, we'll get a lot further down the road of connecting Cleveland. Again, knowing it's not a singular solution.
Yeah. We've had a couple really interesting comments from folks around just the real lives of our families. Again, I know in Oakland, half of our families were missing essential bills even before COVID. And so these issues of just again, the basic access issues that kids face. And one of the things I thought that was interesting, you said, is you have a trusted person go to the home and support with this. One of the people talked about how kids, the first rule of trauma, if you're a traumatized kid, is never talk about trauma. Right. You don't share that outside the house. You don't even share it within the house. And so going there as a trusted partner and kind of coming in, I feel like that actually will open those doors for folks to the real needs that kids have. Because again, kids will not typically express their needs. They learn not to share what's going on at home when things are not going well at home.
Well, kids and families both, right? I mean, if you're a family that is not able to give your children what you want for them, you're not going to open the door to somebody you've never met before and show them that that's your reality. And so, part of the reason that we're going to the home, part of the reason we build it into our brand is to rely on the trust, not of the district, because people don't associate with their district, but the trust with their teacher and with their school, that if the teacher in school says, it's okay, let's come in and solve this problem for you, we think we can get further and faster than if a technician with a Digital C badge and you're like, who's this and what are they doing, right? It's also part of a bigger strategy in our community. Again, going back to providing capital and social capital in the same way that middle and upper middle income families enjoy it. And so, if you would study other parts of our work in the community, you would see other efforts around healthcare, around legal access, around basic needs. So it's become part of the cultural expectation of our community that the district and our partners really do want to help solve problems, which gives us access to that home where a family might otherwise say, I'm kind of embarrassed that I can't give my kids what I want, and I don't want you to see it.
Yeah. That's why, again, it's unfortunate that the districts have become like social workers, legal aid, eviction defense, grocery delivery, CIO, like really all the failed social service sectors. All those things fall on schools at the end of the day, and the reality is we just need to deal with those things and have partnerships that deal with those. But it really is unfortunate just to hear, schools have a lot to do besides helping kids keep the electricity on.
Yeah, we can, I don't know, I just feel like we've had to lean into it. It is our reality. It is what we need. One of the things I'm most proud of about the city of Cleveland is that everything we've done over the past decade has been through public-private partnership. And so, just in the example of basic needs, we've created a Say Yes to Education partnership where our county is providing dollars to support it, our city is, our philanthropy is, that we have somebody in every school, about half of our schools today, but within 2 more years, every school that just blocks and tackles those basic needs for families, and then, thinking about how do we get healthcare, this internet problem we're talking about isn't unique to families with children.
Yeah.
When Ohio closed, and I'm sure it was similar in Oakland, but when Ohio closed, we told families, go home, lock the door, and do everything you need from the internet.
Yeah.
You could not apply for unemployment in Ohio if you didn't have the internet because unemployment was closed, right?
Yeah.
You couldn't go to the doctor. We had to use telehealth. You couldn't go to school. So this is, that's why this internet issue has to be just a public utility, a basic right, just like we had to make electricity a public utility 100 years ago.
Yeah. Again, Truman said a phone on every farm.
Yep.
We need a modem in every whatever, or a high
on
speed.
Every farm.
Yeah, exactly. A modem in every home. Yeah. And it really is just updating to the modern world in the way that we use the new public utilities that are out there, and the ones that are really, again, even if you said to people, would you rather have internet or running water right now? I personally would rather have internet. And I think a lot of folks would too. It really is the most essential. And like you said, it gives access to all these other pieces of life.
Yeah, as a farm kid who grew up poor, I'm going to keep my running water too. I don't want it to be a decision. Look, this is solvable. Other countries have solved this. Other countries have made it more of a utility, and they did it through Wi-Fi. I don't care if it's hardwired or Wi-Fi, just make it available. So I just literally had this conversation before this program where the members of our business community wanted to know what the right solution is. I don't have any problem if we have a citywide Wi-Fi strategy that I can ping anywhere. That's how other countries have handled this. We just have got to get about having a solution. And that solution is going to require cities, states, and federal government infrastructure investment. And frankly, not a particularly huge one compared to the magnitude of other things that we spend money on in this country.
I agree. Like Boeing has more money in the stimulus bill than it would take to fix this across the country. Like we spend a lot of money on a lot of things. It's really a matter of priorities. I did want to, one of the real challenges we've had here in Oakland is our public housing. Actually, it's the weirdest thing that public housing has no access here, and the walls are so bring Wi-Fi through. So it's like these families that are actually in our government housing, often families that are low income and with higher needs, and they are kind of locked out of the digital schoolhouse here. And again, it's kind of a perplexing issue for us. So I think y'all have done some work around supporting homeless families. I'd love to hear a little bit about that.
Yeah, so we're really fortunate to have an incredible director of our public housing here. He is really innovative and forward thinking. He also has partnered on getting internet into our properties. Some of our older properties here are also the big stone vaults that make
Yeah.
it really hard. But he's also modernized into really mixed use and communities, and not the kind of the towers that we remember of the past. Even in the older properties, though, again, he partnered with us we have academic learning pods that we've created.
Cool.
Again, if middle class suburban families should have them, why shouldn't my kids? And so the first ones that opened up were in our housing authorities. And so if he couldn't wire his whole property, he did wire that, right?
Mhm.
We have a large homeless population, and many of them of our homeless young people live in a few shelters that we have a deep relationship with. So they have made sure that they have access for kids. We have adjusted the school schedules that partner with those homes to make sure that the school schedule and the home schedule can work to support kids. It really requires, getting this done requires an empathy for, meeting our families where they are, not where we want them to be. And then, really digging into the support it takes to do that. And I think those are some examples of how we're doing that here in Cleveland. And again, I want to say it's imperfect. We're not
Yeah.
anywhere close to where we need to be. So I'm not on here bragging that we've solved the unsolvable problem. What I'm proud of is that our community is actively after it.
Yeah, that's what I would say. You all are envisioning solutions, and I appreciate that you're really listening to the needs of the community. Like you said, I think a lot of times we want the community to meet us where we're at, and kind of hold them to that standard. And when they don't, we think there's some deficiency there, where it's really our job to meet them where they're at. And
Probably now more than ever, right? I mean, this is stressful for all of us.
yeah,
And if you are a family with children at home, you know how much your stress level went up.
yeah,
Now try being a family with children at home and being poor, because poverty is a full-time job. It was a
yeah,
full-time job before this all happened. And so, to that point, we said to our families, and I have repeated this, hopefully till people are sick of hearing it, there are three things that I want our families to do. One, don't try to be a great teacher. Be a great mom or dad or caregiver. That's your job. So
mm-hmm,
don't stress yourself out by
mm-hmm,
thinking you're a sixth grade math teacher. Just be a great mom or dad.
yep,
Two, turn everything you're doing into your own learning experience. Talk about what you're watching on TV. I don't care if it's comedy and not news. Why was that joke funny?
yeah, yeah,
Go to the grocery store together, write the bills together, cook together, whatever you do, right? And then the third is, this is a global pandemic. We've never been through this. Ask for help. There is no shame in not knowing how to survive a pandemic. We've never done it before. If we can
mm-hmm,
do those three things collectively together as a community, then we can take the time. And I've said we've had a bumpy implementation of our technology, but I got to tell you, I think because we've continued to say, and in Cleveland, this has just been our reality. We're in it together.
mm-hmm.
Protect the land. Our families are sticking with us. They're weathering through. They're trying to figure it out, instead of seeing some of the kind of explosions of this has failed kind of things we're seeing in other parts of the country.
Yeah, and so what are you hearing from families around this work? Both, I think the challenges we've talked some about, but also like when you guys connect families up, or come to that door, like what are some of the stories you're hearing out of the community around the work?
So, it depends on who you ask, right? We have
Yep.
37,000 kids, many, many families. Um, Many families have expressed appreciation for getting through this together, and acknowledging that it's frustrating, and just being honest about the reality. I think, again, often we try to pretend things are better than they are, instead of
Yep.
just saying, sorry you had that experience today.
Yep.
People have been grateful for the acknowledgement. People have been pleasantly surprised at what their kids are experiencing in the digital classroom once they are there. It's not great, it's not perfect, but our teachers have just done everything they can to figure this out. And families are saying it's better than I thought it was going to be overall, right? I have a 5-year-old girl who lives across the street from me. I call her my granddaughter. I've known her dad since he was in high school, and she's a kindergartner. And she came over on Tuesday night, and she bounced into the living room jumped up on the couch. She had her iPad in her hand and she threw it open to show me her class in Seesaw. And she was all excited. And I said, "How's it going?" to her dad. And he said, "Boy, the first couple of days were pretty tough, but I'm figuring it out. I'm getting a rhythm." But again, it's a culture of, sticking together, learning and improving and assessing and adapting. We said when we started last week, take your time, do things like have a scavenger hunt around the tool. Don't dive into math on the first day. Take the time to get comfortable with the tools, build relationships like you would in your regular classroom. The rest will come. And I think that our families, I think our kids and families have appreciated that. We've got some we still got to find. We have about 85% of our kids and families actively checked in and doing stuff. That means 15% that aren't yet. So just like in, a normal school year, we got to go find the kid that didn't show up. But overall, I think we're making it through.
And I appreciate the emphasis on the social emotional part of it. Like, I think this is hard on everyone, social emotionally, and particularly for kids who maybe have less experience and are used to a certain thing and have a set of very high expectations. Like, school is school. That is the time when you see your friends like that, and we can't underestimate the importance of that social aspect of it.
I'm laughing because one of the first things our kids figured out in our platform was how to keep the class open and then have check in with their friends. The teacher was gone and the friends were all chatting, and so we had to go back and say, first of all, love the ingenuity. Got to celebrate the ingenuity of that. Second of all, how neat that the kids want to reconnect. But third, we actually have a responsibility to make sure that they can't do stuff like that. So how do we make sure that the controls are in place that bad stuff can't happen in that space? But you're right, there's a lot of connectivity. I think in Cleveland, we have a little bit of an advantage in that we've been investing in social and emotional learning as a priority of the district for a decade. Okay. And so, SEL's kind of come into its own now. People know what it is. When we started, we would mention social emotional learning. People would go, "What's that?" Right? So again, part of our community culture is the prioritization of social and emotional support. And so even getting ready for this year, we developed a parent care plan strategy where our educators were calling the home and doing a survey. But the very first thing we said is, "Dirk, how you doing? How are your kids?" There's no question to answer here. Just really want to know, right? And then we said, okay, let's talk about your tech needs. Let's talk about your food needs. Let's talk about your child care needs. Did you do the census? Because we got to get you done there. Do you want me to walk you through it? 10 more minutes. Did you register to vote? If not, I can do that. 5 minutes. I just got to ask you the questions. But that relationship, then is why parents are sticking with us when they're frustrated, when they're upset, when they're angry because they're on the hold too long, is because, in the short term, I can be ticked off, but in the long term, we're building this important relationship that I would argue is even more important in this stressful time.
Yeah, that'll be more enduring than some math lesson right now by far. And I think, you got to be a friend before you ask a friend. And I just think, again, parents will really appreciate even a failed or like not imperfect outreach.
That's right.
The idea that you care enough to listen, to try, and to authentically come to parents. I think by that builds relational capital right there.
And then I would also just connect it to that, say communities need to ask themselves, what is their point of view on how they're responding. So we've been talking about the digital divide and the racial justice and social justice behind it, but it's in everything you do. So there's a lot of rhetoric right now about lost learning. And clearly there will be some regression without a doubt, but we did not lose learning. We know how to learn. So if your kid isn't reading yet, we can still teach your kid to read. We lost time for learning. That seems like a distinction, too subtle. It is not. Because if my educators believe that there is unfinished learning for Dirk's daughter, and so I'm going to find out where she is and how to finish that learning, that's a whole different approach than you were supposed to be here and you're in a deficit and my job is to fix the deficit.
Yeah.
So it really needs to permeate every way you think about how you're approaching this pandemic, whether it be this digital divide issue that we're talking about or your larger response as a community.
I love that. I'm actually going to take that line and kind of use that. I'll try to remember to credit you, the most interesting person in the universe. No, that's actually it's a great distinction that I think it's more than just semantics. It actually is a mindset in the way you're approaching this challenge of where this child is academically. And it's like they lost learning time.
Well, and it's not that somehow Cleveland lost learning time and everybody else didn't. The whole world is going through a reset. And so, the difference of saying to a family, there's nothing wrong with your child, so let's find out where she is and how we're going to move forward, compared to saying, well, your daughter's supposed to be reading at this level and isn't. It immediately sets a different set of expectations for the learner, for the parent, and for the educator.
Yeah, that's right on. That's right on. So we're getting kind of toward the end here. A couple of questions I just had, like, are there, I don't like to say silver linings to this thing because it's such a dark cloud that I'm not sure the silver lining can even outshine the darkness. But are there things that you think will emerge from this crisis that'll make us better?
So I would say there are things that will, and there are opportunities that could be. I have shared here locally the Audre Lorde quote that the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. And I raise that now because all of the civil rights work and the social justice work and the racial equity work that we've done for decades has been trying to change existing systems that were not built to serve my kids. 86% of my kids are people of color, right? But we've had to push from the inside. We are at a moment now where we can't go back to that system, even if we wanted to. So why are we not asking ourselves, what are the new tools now that the master's house has been destroyed, instead of spending time getting back into the house?
I love that.
So there is a wild opportunity actually coming out of COVID. Now, I have to temper that with state policy and federal policy will dictate whether that happens or not. And if you've ever read the book Shock Doctrine, what we know is that these kinds of shocks are when actually power people grab more power. And so, I temper the opportunity with why it could or could not manifest over time in a grand scale way. But even if it doesn't, and I'm going to do my part to get it as far as it can, we will never not be a one-to-one district again, right? For a district that I said in the beginning, I had to convict myself that I never tried to solve that problem because I didn't see it as a solution. We will never go back, right? We will hopefully learn how students can have more agency in their work through the differences in the asynchronous things that they successfully completed, right? We will hopefully do more personalized learning forevermore, where mastery is the concept, not how many hours you sat in a seat. I've used the example here. Teacher has 25 kids in a class. 10 of them are bored because they're ready to move forward, but they can't. 10 of them are frustrated and afraid to put their hand up and be embarrassed. And, 5 of them are right where the teacher wants to be. What if we pull out of this that actually Eric doesn't have to come today because he's doing fine, work asynchronously, and now my class just became 15. And then on the middle day, Wednesday, that most of us hybrid are using as office hours tutoring, we kept that. So the 5 that don't need me now, they're also asynchronous while I work with just 10 kids. We will close racial gaps. We will close language gaps. We will close disability gaps like we've never closed before if we can move the system even that far. Stay tuned. We'll see if we do it.
Yeah. No, and again, I think there's so many opportunities. Like, school has not changed in forever. It's basically like 20 to 30 kids with one teacher, all grouped by age, all doing the same thing. That doesn't make sense, especially with technology where we can differentiate in different ways. And I think the role of government is key here in terms of how we move forward. I've heard, the cable companies are now proposing something that basically says, hey, let us take care of this for y'all. Um, like we'll handle this problem for you. But I think we probably need a little bit more than that. And I know that you are one that has mentioned, this public utility aspect of broadband and the internet. And I'd love to just hear, we put a quote up there for you a second ago, but I'd love to hear a little bit about that from you. Because I think part of this, we need to change the structure and the rules beyond just like responding to the current situation. And some of that is just this internet piece. So I'd love to
Yeah.
hear.
Yeah, so I've been saying in our community this, we have to make this a public utility, and the way I would frame it and the way I would ask you to think about it is, okay, we've got everybody connected, the hotspots are out there, we get a vaccine, this is finally all over, we get to go back to school. You don't expect me to knock on doors and take the internet back, do you? Because I'm not doing it.
Yeah.
So we have now connected a community, at least a community that has children. We haven't solved the non-children homes.
Mm-hmm.
We have to just make that the new permanent reality.
Mm-hmm.
And again, the pandemic didn't create this, it only exposed it. But we've known forever how much you can do and actually is the primary way to do on the internet. And we've also known in my community, 46% of the community, nearly half, didn't have that opportunity. And so, we've got to, just like we regulated, electricity was not a regulated commodity when it was first available. The telephone wasn't. Over time, we realized that we have to regulate it, fairly so that it is available to everyone. I will say, our efforts around the country are getting the attention of the providers. And I think they're more hungry to be part of a meaningful solution now than they maybe were in March. But also, they're not doing bad in this industry, because I can tell you, families that can afford to upgrade their homes have been actively at it. So there's still money to be made, even as we solve for those who can't afford to pay for it.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, they're going to get richer through this process. More people are going to need it. Again, cities like yourselves in Oakland is just going to buy these subscriptions for tens of thousands of families. So I do think, and psychologically, I think once families have this, it will be hard to take it away from them. Like that sense of kind of the status quo is that I have internet, I have broadband, and it's paid for. Like politically, it'll get a lot trickier for someone to pull that away once it's given. And so I just think as a strategic piece, I think the more that we can get people just expecting that as a thing, that'll drive the politics of it going forward.
Well, and I think also this is one of those rare opportunities for where cities and rural communities can come together on a shared agenda, regardless of all of the other politic. And I'm sure it's true in California too, because our rural communities are just as disconnected as our cities. There's actually this bubble called the suburbs that is more connected, not completely connected. The data is actually pretty interesting there, but certainly more connected. And so this is an opportunity for people who often see themselves as in very different worlds. And I say this as a kid who grew up on a farm outside of Toledo and now lives and has lived most of his life in cities, to actually unite around something that matters to all of us and has nothing to do with whether we're red or blue.
This is like the universal issue, really. It's like the universal on-ramp to the federal highway system or something, and we did a Kentucky show, and it's the same, hood to the holler is how they put it. And the needs were the same from the hood to the holler, and they need to be addressed from the hood to the holler. And like I said, it's not red, blue. It's not even rural, urban. It's not even suburban. It should be this basic standard that we all get.
And think about it as a model to unite in a country that seems to be unable to unite on anything. This is a fixable problem. We have the know-how to do. We have the, on no matter what your politic is, everybody needs it. If we do this, when we do this, we now have actually found a way to bring people back together on a common agenda. What's the next one? It actually could open doors.
Yeah, it's like the new digital deal or something like that right now, which actually could, again, it would unite us. And it just seems like it's a matter of will right now and leadership. And so that's why I want to thank you for your leadership on this issue and really just drive. It's not going to move without leadership. Like it will move. It'll just move at the behest of the cable companies or at some inertia or status quo. but I really appreciate your leadership on this. So any final words or thoughts, or what would it mean for Cleveland if you guys actually accomplish this goal of providing internet for all?
Well, first of all, in Cleveland, we never say if, we only say when. So when we accomplish this, I think, connectivity is going to open so many other doors and resources to our kids and families. And it's just another example of our collective desire in this community to create the capital and social capital that so many other families already enjoy. And while I really appreciate your acknowledgement of my leadership, I'm really being able to give voice to something that many, many other people smarter than me are actually making happen for kids and families in Cleveland.
Well, I appreciate your work. You've proven yourself to be the most interesting person in the universe over the course of this interview. We've had some things around. I do think, again, the distance learning folks, there are a bunch of folks that have been doing kind of like homeschooling and online education for a long time. And I think that's kind of been like the stepchild of public education or something like that, where we really need to think about how we bring those stepchildren and what they've learned over that period into the more traditional public schools.
I think that's true. I think another thing that is a truth, whether we will acknowledge it or not, and goes back to, again, to just calling truth, families have a whole new lens on what teaching and learning looks like. Mm-hmm. First, they do have a much higher appreciation for their teachers, as they should, because teachers are incredibly hard workers and very respected in this country. Yeah. But they also know what we weren't doing very well because they saw it happening in their living rooms. Mm-hmm. So this is an opportunity for us to recreate the relationship between students, families, and teachers, learn the best lessons from those who are already providing online learning in digital and virtual academies, and create something that's more fair, just, and good for our communities.
I can't really end it much better than that. I usually have a little closeout. So I'm just going to thank you and just leave it there, because that is the answer for us. Thanks, everyone, for joining us. Thank you for really being a part of it. I'm still going to recognize you as being a leader on these solutions and leader in partnering and pushing this stuff forward with a vision. Folks, please engage. If you want to engage in Cleveland, get involved there. We do have our petition to the FCC still around trying to get them to actually treat this as a public utility. It may take an election, but let's keep that pressure up. Talk to your congressperson, make them know that you care, that this matters, that the FCC should regulate the broadband as a public utility. But I just want to thank you again, Eric, for just being a part of this solution and for being on the show. Like I said, you're the most interesting person I've ever met.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I've been called a lot of things, so I'll take interesting.
But really appreciate you all. So thank you all for joining. We'll have another show next Friday. And just keep pushing. We need everyone to be working locally around accountability on broadband for our most underserved families. And we need folks to be pushing on the national level to get the policy changes that we need to make this work and to fund it for everyone. This is absolutely doable. It's just a matter of will. And so be part of that will with us. So thank you all. Really